faces.
I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about boys.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
Hey, all right. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World. You've heard Dustin's name mentioned in the intro. He's having a bit of a hiatus while he looks after a newborn baby, taking a bit of paternal leave, which I could do with myself, to be honest, at the moment. I feel as though I could do with a bit of a break and time off as things start opening back up again. A bit of time off to spend in the pubs, I think. I don't know, what you think, Gary? You hearing us?
Gary, are you hearing us?
Yeah? No?
We're talking beers and pubs.
We're talking beers and pubs. Typical.
Favorite activity.
Just as the party gets started, we lose Gary's audio. What about you, Quirine? Are you beering and pubbing at the moment?
Well, in the Netherlands, we're still under some special, let's say, rules with COVID. So the terraces are open during the day,
right?
Which is good.
Fair enough.
So I can have a beer during the day.
That's good. Better than nothing. Yeah. So Gary's not hearing anything at the moment. That's a bit of a that is a bit of a nightmare. Let's see if Gary can try leaving and returning. Let's just stick that in here while we try and sort Gary's audio out. So Netherlands at the moment is not too great then, Quirine, in terms of...
in the case it's getting better and better. It's just you can go out and have a drink outside or lunch during those hours.
Vaccine wise, what's going on? Not much.
Well, no, there's definitely some vaccinations going on, but it's not the best yet. But we're getting there. We're on a roll now. I'm positive about.
That's good.
Scaling up, so that's good. Yeah,
that's good. Gary, we've got you back. It sounds like
we have. Yes.
Nice.
Sorry about that. Who knows?
You missed the main part of the discussion, which we tend to have at the beginning of every show, which is talking about the pubs reopening and what everyone's tipple is these days.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I got my first vaccine last Friday, so another week or two, and I'm going to be I'm going to be hitting the pubs. I made national news as well when I was at the vaccine centre. The national news crew turned up and started filming us all. So yeah, that was weird.
Wow, interesting. I once made national news when I went to visit a place called Butterfly World in the northeast, and it was a time when, do you remember Alexander the meerkat from the adverts? I don't know if you know of that, Quirine, in the Netherlands. There's a meerkat called Alexander that used to be the mascot for an insurance company, and one of the compare the market companies. And we went to this Butterfly World to see these meerkats because we used to like meerkats. And ITV, the news, showed up filming a special on how meerkats and everyone's loving meerkats because of this advert and stuff. So we got interviewed about our love for meerkats, which was well. So there you go.
What did you say? I love meerkats.
That was the only thing that made it on. Just me going, I love meerkats. Yeah. But yeah, no, it was crazy. It's on Facebook somewhere. I think I'll have to dig it out at some point. But anyway, nice. Enough meerkat chat, and they've got a bot actually. Funnily enough, Alexander is in bot form these days. Whether he used Microsoft Bot Services for that, I don't know. Maybe that will be revealed during the course of this conversation. But Gary and Quirine, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you joining us. Looking forward to this discussion. We're going to have a bit of a chat about Microsoft Azure Bot Services and some of the technologies. Hello, Rachel, tuning in on YouTube. And if you are tuning in, feel free to ask Gary or Quirine any questions you have as we go through the discussion. We'll do our very best to answer them. And for those of you that are tuning in, before we do the proper intros, we are running a little webinar with Gary and Quirine coming up in the next few weeks, June the 20th or 17th, I think it is. So if you're interested in that, we're going to dive into some of the discussions that we're going to have today. Are going to touch on some of these topics, but in this webinar, we're going to really get some hands-on a close look at some of the services that Microsoft offer as far as conversational AI is concerned. Things like Composer, connecting bots up to the Azure communication services and send them into phone lines, and best practice for voice design, chatbot design, all that kind of stuff. So if you are interested in that, do head to vux.world/Microsoft, and we'll keep throwing that link up there throughout if you are at all interested. I definitely recommend you tune in because it's going to be immense. So without further ado, Gary, let's start with you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and about what you're up to at Microsoft and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm a program manager on the Conversational AI team, formerly an engineer on the Bot Framework SDK team. And my main focus day to day is gathering the customer requirements, understanding the industry and the market, where is it going in terms of conversational AI, and then planning the roadmap in collaboration with colleagues like Quirine and our engineering colleagues for what we are going to see over the next sort of 12, 18 months. And yeah, delivering on that and making sure that we've got the best possible experience.
Nice. Sounds good. Quirine, what about yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Microsoft.
Experience. It's the right hook on that. I'm a designer in the Conversational AI team with Gary, and that actually means I work on the design of our bot builder products. So Composer is one of them, but there's a lot more services surrounding that. And I actually focus a lot on the template. So we're going to release some, well, let's say quality enhanced templates that are ready for bot builders to use. So if you're a dev, a designer, or a content writer, it's definitely of interest to you, because we highlight the patterns that work best in, let's say, typical scenarios. Before I consulted within Microsoft, so I actually designed virtual agents and bots for some customers. So I know from that end how nice it is to have the tools work with you, well, kind of for you and with you on what you want to create, right? So it's also now fun to be at the other end with Gary and, of course, the whole dev team to create those tools for people to create. Yeah.
And I think that's something we've got in common because prior to Microsoft a couple of years ago, I spent 10 years out in a digital agency building bots for the last sort of 3 or 4 years with these tools. So yeah, it's been an exciting time to be able to come in on the inside and actually get to shape them.
It's interesting now. What's like, so there'll be people tuning in who, I always ask this question to designers who've come from doing stuff like UX design, more visual design, into conversation design. And an interesting question is like, what was the first thing that you learned that kind of struck you as something different to the typical role or skill sets that you needed for graphical design? So going from, and this would be interesting to get both your answers, going from people who have been using the tools that we all use to create applications to build conversational AIs to the other side, to actually working on the tools themselves. What were some of the things that kind of stuck out to you as either lessons or things that were surprising or things that you wanted to address immediately when working on, rather than with the tools, working on the actual tool in themselves? Let's start with you, Gary.
Yeah, so I guess I can go, it's sort of 2 parts really. I can go right back to 2016 when Microsoft's bot products were first announced. And the day after I decided to build, we had a fridge in the office at work. We called it the timesheet fridge, and it was full of beer. And we had a lock on the fridge, and at 4 p.m. on a Friday, if everyone done their timesheets, it got unlocked and everyone got a beer, right? And everyone loved it, but the biggest problem was people would forget to do their timesheets, etc. And I then set out to build a bot, and I made a sort of a bot for this fridge. And I put that out there for people to use so they could say, hey, have I done my timesheets? Who's not done their timesheets? More importantly, who do I need to go and hassle? And the feedback came back, it works, it's great, but it's also broken. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they were like, well, it's not responding when I say hello or hey there, how are you? Do you know Siri? And I think that was the first time it really struck me. And I think it's something that all of us internally who've worked on bots externally have in common, which is the understanding that this really is a different method of interaction, and the tools that you need to build them are very different. You know, something that we've been focused on in the last few months, and I'm sure we'll talk about quite a bit on this podcast, but something that Quirine and I have been working on is how do we make sure that the way in which you author for those interaction types, both text and speech, either or both often, is as seamless as possible. And it's something that's pretty unique. You don't really, it's not a problem that we have in, in the web. It's akin to responsive design, I guess. That's the closest thing I can sort of map it to. But that was the biggest thing. How do we make sure that we make it seamless for you to author and test multimodal experiences?
Interesting. What about you, Quirine? What's the main things that you learned immediately from starting to work on the tool in itself? What things stuck out to you?
Well, I think maybe as a designer, so I actually am an industrial designer. So I started like designing bikes, which wasn't web related at all. And then I kind of, grew into that, seeing that it's not just about physical objects. They have a whole context surrounding it, which is often an app or a website or whatever haptic you can think around that. And I think what I found very inspiring or interesting is this notion of language. So how do you communicate what your product does or what your service does? And communication, I think, comes back in when you're actually designing the tools, that you need to be very clear about what the actions are you as a developer can take in some steps, or as a designer, they might be different, right? Or as a content writer, what can we do in that aspect? And I think in designing the tools, that's what's quite inspiring to me, because it all comes back to language. And and not just language, it's more of culture, it's context, it's when you design a virtual agent in Europe, it's different than in Asia or in the US, or should it be, should it not be? And that's because we communicate differently. If I make a Dutch a joke and translate it into English from Dutch, it will sound very odd. It won't be funny at all. Maybe it will be.
You pretty much just described 90% of my joke repertoire there.
That's why I think you're funny, but that's the only reason. No, but in all honesty, I think in my mind we think about bots and virtual agents, but it's more about in the more abstract layer. It's about conversational AI. It's about understanding conversations, and that's where AI can help us. But we're still the crafters of the end experience in that, and that's what still makes it very fascinating to work in today. But I think it will only be more relevant in the years to come.
I think
background right that.
Yeah, no, I think you agree. I agree with that. Like, I remember the very first time I started dabbling with some of the tool sets out there, and the importance of language when you're creating a tool is important as well, because I remember when we first started building Alexa skills and Google Actions and things like that, and it was one system calls it a slot, another one calls it an entity, one calls it a parameter, another calls it a variable, and it's the language that's used to describe the tools that we're using and the activities that we're doing is important if we're going to get some sort of agreement on the standards of what it takes to design a good application, surely.
Yes, 100%. And by the very nature of our product, it's very extensible. So we support a number of different channels out of what we call channels out of the box. So web chat, we had Skype, we've got Teams, we've got Slack. They all have different terms for different things, and so we have almost a dual layering of that problem, which is we need to make sure that our tool set and SDKs and platform has terms that people who are coming from other platforms can understand, as well as the end user experience working across them, because we also have extensibility so that our platform and suite of tools can power Alexa skills, can power Google Assistants. And so, I think there's been some consolidation. You've obviously got natural terms like NLP, natural language models, but we still all seem to have different terms for a dialogue or a topic or something like that. And
a trigger.
I think it's not. Yeah, exactly. I think but hopefully everyone's got to the point where we've named them intuitively so people can move between the platforms. I think for the most part that's true.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got MS Build coming up soon. Is it next week or the week after?
Next week.
Yeah,
next week. Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah.
We'll include a link to people to sign up for MS Building. So, I mean, we'll get into the tooling and things like that, and we'll have the discussion about that potentially, maybe what we can look forward to at Build. But for those people who, maybe you're a designer who predominantly uses a tool like VoiceFlow, or maybe you're a developer who hasn't yet come across or used Microsoft's bot services. There's a lot of very powerful applications that have been built using the Microsoft infrastructure. The BBC Beeb Assistant comes to mind. I know there's countless examples, Flow in the US, and a whole bunch of, I think Swisscom actually use Microsoft behind the scenes with Teneo over the top of it. And so there's a really good example of some very high performing, very well built conversational AI applications that have been built using Microsoft services. But for people, and I remember going through this with all of the providers, with IBM, with Google, with Amazon, with Microsoft, when I very first started exploring the tool sets available, it was, there's lots of different capabilities essentially, and I'm wondering whether we can just start there in terms of giving us the lay of the land in terms of what exactly is available in terms of kind of conversational AI or voice capabilities that Microsoft has. And then maybe we'll get on to the Composer conversation, because I know, Quirine, you've been doing a lot of work on that and templates and things like that. So, but maybe, Scott, I wonder whether you can just give us the lay of the land for someone who's never come across Microsoft's AI services or conversational AI services. What capabilities exist and what products are out there?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a great point that you make, that it can be confusing for someone coming in, because another thing that we've been doing over the last 12 months is trying to get that story as crisp as possible. I think it's fair to say that we struggled in exactly the same way that other providers do. So effectively, we call the all-encompassing piece is the Microsoft AI conversational AI platform, and that is effectively a suite of platforms, tools, and services that allow you to build conversational applications. Now, underpinning everything is where we started, which is the Microsoft Bot Framework SDK. It's available in a few different languages, and you can use code to write conversational applications. And on top of that, we have something called Azure Bot Service, which is a Microsoft Azure cloud service where you can take your application, which is effectively just an API, and you can plug it into this service, and you can then pick one or more channels or platforms that you want to surface your conversational agent on. And so it's very, very quick for you to make it available via your website, now via telephony. But since the inception of the Azure Bot Service and Bot Framework, the number of services and platforms that we have has grown within the conversational AI platform. So if you're a pro developer, you can use Azure Bot Service, the Bot Framework SDK, and Bot Framework Composer, our visual designer, to craft applications, bot applications, and extend them with code. And it's extremely flexible. However, we also have something called Power Virtual Agents, which is part of our Power Platform. And that's effectively a visual designer, which is aimed more at the citizen developer or the business user, where it's low code, no code, effectively, so that you can actually start on Rails. You can effectively do a subset of what you can do within Composer. But we've worked really hard over the last 6-12 months, certainly since Power Virtual Agents came online and went generally available, to make sure that the experiences work together. right? Because they are built on top of our platform. So effectively, where we've ended up is we now have a suite of tools and services where you can start where it makes sense for you, like based on your scenario, depending on how complex it is, based on the audience type, whether you're a business user, a citizen developer, or a pro developer. But you can collaborate with anyone, right? So you can actually extend solutions either way. And then we also have additional services that are cropping up now, which are more specialized and more vertically focused. So things like Microsoft Health Bot, which provides health-specific solutions that are more turnkey in terms of being able to roll them out. But again, we're all based on the same bot framework SDK and bot service.
Interesting. And then presumably something like Lewis NLU sits behind the bot framework, and then you have, isolated speech services that you could use, like text-to-speech, natural language generation, things like that, that you can presumably plumb in as and when needed.
And that's a really good way of framing it, which is we have the bot service, and then to the side we have other AI services, our cognitive services, Lewis for language understanding, Q&A Maker for knowledge, which you effectively plug in. They are what adds the intelligence to your bot.
Nice.
So it's more like pick and choose from, let's say, our cognitive services side, how you want to enhance your assistant or bot. And I think what Gary mentioned really, really nicely is, so we do have PVA, which is maybe a little bit more, if I can say the word, patternized. So it's easier to follow, and you do not need to have like code experience really to set up a quick demo or a bot that does enterprise things or scenarios that are common. But if you want to really go deeper and personalize it to a certain extent that framework doesn't, that, let's say, offering doesn't give you that, then you can enhance it with Composer, which gives you, in that sense, a lot more flexibility, and also looking at the channels, the amount of services surrounding it. It's just whatever fits, you as a developer or as a team. It's not just a developer creating an agent. It's a multidisciplinary team if you do it correctly or the way it should be. That you have a conversation designer and someone who's very cautious around content, and of course, I think you explained that really nicely. Yeah.
And when we've spoken in the past, we've had conversations around the ability, because obviously it's a platform, which means that you can build as much or as little as you want. You can build one conversation if you wanted to, and this notion of enabling companies to get started with relatively low risk in terms of time, effort, outlay, relatively low expense. Because if you're just going to trial one conversation in a IVR, for example, or maybe you just want to trial a conversational agent on certain pages of your website that handle certain queries, you don't have to boil the ocean and do the whole thing at once. I'm just curious about how maybe we'll get onto that conversation in terms of how you recommend people get started. But before that, what's your kind of observations on the kind of teams and people that are using this? Is it predominantly your likes of Swisscom, who we mentioned, and BBC, who are building large scale, high volume, customized assistants on top of this technology? Are you seeing, smaller organizations able to build and deploy conversational agents? What kind of companies predominantly are you noticing adopting it, and what kind of teams do they have working on it? Bit of a general question, but I'm just trying to help people frame whether or not this is like a toolkit for large enterprises spending millions of pounds, or whether it's a toolkit for small companies who can, get started, and what your observations of who's doing this in the marketplace are.
No, it's so I think, like, of course we work for Microsoft, and enhancing these enterprise customers sometimes is very convincing because it works really nice even in such a big corporate, let's say. And this is my personal opinion, right? So, but I mean, we've worked with startups in this sense. So last year we worked really closely with Optimus Ride, so autonomous vehicles around Boston. When it's just a small team, It's two devs, a designer, and us just trying to work together a little bit and see how they use our tools, because we also want to learn from our customers, right? It's never something that we just push out and say, get on with it. We want to learn from how bot builders use our tools. But I think in general, it's a really big mix. So you can get started quite easily, right? It's free, it's online, it's open source. So the templates are there as well. It's just we're seeing that, of course, it's going to be a big mix in the way we've positioned it as a platform. So you do not need to have all those prescriptions set to get to that, let's say, extreme level. You can get started right away. I think that's how I perceive it. And maybe, Gary, you see differently. So.
No, I think you're right. It's definitely a big mix. And actually, it's not just a case of, is it a large enterprise who are with a large team? We've seen large enterprises with small, tiny teams building bots that are going to get rolled out across the organization. And we've seen large enterprises where they're more mature in their, conversational application thinking. And it's usually a journey, right, where they will start off. I mean, in general, certainly when I was external from Microsoft in an agency, you saw one of two things. Either it's a developer who has discovered the technology, they go and build a proof of concept that solves some sort of a problem, then that bubbles up towards the sort of the leadership or the business users, and they go, oh wow, we're going to roll this out, we want this, and then it almost organically grows. Or it comes the other way, where the business users have sort of seen, or the leadership have seen an example of it, and they say, okay, I want you to go and build and solve this problem, but I've seen it with a bot. And I think that it's really a mix there. I think the one thing I would say, though, is even tiny teams, like even a single developer can do an incredible amount with this platform. And I worked on a bot for a large automotive company in the UK before joining Microsoft, and they wanted to roll out a proof of concept that was on their website that answered questions and handled things like changing account details. Just a couple of small use cases. And the plan was to have that on the website and pushed out for 4 weeks. And then they would take it off and review it. That went out after a very short development window with a very small team. It was myself, a UX designer, and a project manager. And it never got turned off, because it started handling 4 million messages over 3 months. And I think that's quite often how these things start. They start as small teams and expand.
Interesting. Yeah.
Maybe just to add, it's also very advisable to start small and create this core team that understands what patterns work best or what to consider in this specific context, right? So Gary just sketched a very specific context. And if you do it right, then the value is there immediately, which is so great about, let's say, the design in bots or conversational agents, because there's so much value there if you just start small and get to know what you're doing. And that's where it kind of comes back with, if you start with the tooling on this platform, you're almost there already. So, there's just so much
and boil the ocean. Don't try and boil the ocean. We've seen some of the biggest failures I've seen have been where organizations have just taken on too much. They've said, we're going to build an assistant that works across the whole organization and handles everything from HR to vacation. It does everything. And those projects do, get some steam underneath them, and they've got large teams, but they just never deliver because they're waiting for it to be finished. And actually, the truth is, with a conversational application, you start, but you don't ever finish. Right? So,
it's like recruiting a workforce, isn't it? The more bots you add, the more conversations you add, the more people you're pretty much employing, and the more it takes looking after, and the more it takes work to do. I think I think having that vision is a really good idea, and being able to sell that to the people who are going to end up giving you the space and team to be able to implement this kind of stuff is a good idea. But yeah, you're right. You don't have to do it all at the same time. You start one at a time.
Yeah, and we're very much. I think as much as we've seen the teams mature, the roles mature that we've seen over the years. What we're also starting to see is that almost operationalization of conversational AI authoring, building, and governance. And I think many of the conversations that we have with customers today is about, well, we've now got 3 successful bots that are rolled out. We've got this one that's over here in Microsoft Teams that's handling HR. We've got this one that's on the public website that's handling, customer service. And we've got another one over here which we've rolled out on, Alexa. How do we bring them together? We don't want, or in fact, the question often comes back, should we have many bots or should we have one from right? Yeah, and so it's now a case of, well, how can we effectively structure that platform within the organization? So the conversations that we're having have definitely matured significantly in the last 18 months.
Yeah, especially when you have those situations where it's just the natural emergent strategy, isn't it, that tends to happen where HR needs something now. So if they can get a team in to come and build them a bot for Teams and extend all that stuff out to the organization so they can book holidays and, see how much sick leave they've got or whatever it might be, then that makes sense. But then meanwhile, the marketing team wanted to run some kind of promotional thing. So they build a chatbot, and then the customer service team are looking at the IVR. And all of a sudden, it takes someone in the organization to say, hang on, what, you mean you're using that technology and you're using that technology, and what's going on over here?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. It's nice to see that things are maturing, though. I mean, we've got a nice kind of maturity model that we use to try and assess where people are. And that's one of those things, is how many different bots have you got using how many different platforms, managed by how many different teams, and trying to come up with a standardized approach, because the way that one team designs conversations is not going to be the same as another team, and they're going to be using language and terms and all this kind of stuff that might be inconsistent in that. So
and we've seen incredible growth with COVID, obviously with the whole pandemic. And as you said, I think you touched on the point perfectly, which is it was out of necessity. So many companies just suddenly were disparate and remote, and they needed this digital transformation to happen. I mean, we now see we've seen 4 billion messages go through the platform. And I think that's over the last year. Yeah, 4 billion messages over the last year and 400% growth. I mean, it's just been staggering to watch and scary. At the same time, you're looking at it and thinking, okay, well, how do we make sure we scale and our products mature along with our customers? Because it's the best problem and the worst problem, where your customers are the ones who are saying to you, there's not enough there. We need you to keep pushing that bar forward.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think from our end and our team, we want to be ahead of that curve, right? So we feel the market go up, and of course, I mean, COVID has its extremes, but it's still, the trend is still going high, and we need to be, well, I feel we are prepared, but we need to keep on moving with what our customers want, or what scenarios they're thinking of, which go further than indeed. I think, quite a few years back, it was just a simple chatbot that did some, let's say, manual extraction that you could ask FAQs to, but it's grown. It's in voice, but it's in hybrid. And how do you manage that even? And then what Gary just mentioned, how do you manage your whole pipeline of bots? And maybe that's just in one country. But if you're a global company,
Yeah, you mentioned there, I mean, Gary, you touched on it, you mentioned AI ops and stuff like that. And obviously with 400% growth and 4 billion messages sent, there's going to be teams here who maybe started out in your kind of car example, where start out with a chatbot thinking it's going to be a trial, put a bot in there quickly because COVID's here. All of a sudden, they're not just managing a new bot that they've launched, they're managing scale. and they're getting, I've been aware of many organizations who've had, thousands of interactions over the course of days, and now they need to deal with, and it's not just fire it away and let it go. It's like, well, we need to analyze what's happening. We need to make sure that it's working. We need to retrain the models and pick up on things that are outside of the initial scope and all that kind of stuff. So it's the volume is good and the scale is good, but then presumably that gives you new requirements from the tooling perspective and from a provision perspective, because now you're dealing with customers who are facing situations for the first time,
Yeah, hugely. And we have we've had a focus for some time, but it's going to be even more of a focus for us going forward over the next 6 to 12 months on telemetry, right? We have a very rich telemetry layer within our platform that I don't think we've necessarily always done a good job of making discoverable, but you can enable very, very quickly, and it's much easier now within Composer, a rich set of telemetry that will tell you so much detail about how the conversation is happening. And we've even mapped some of that telemetry over to more traditional visualizations that you might get for the web. So for example, you'll have probably seen those diagrams in Google Analytics or other such platforms where you see that everybody comes to the homepage and then 10% of the traffic's going one place, and here's where people are dropping off in each layer. We've now hooked our telemetry up so that you can do that with dialogues, pieces of your conversation, so that you can actually see how people are moving through your bot, which is incredibly interesting to see, especially for a richer application. And I think there's a realization now from a lot of customers out there that telemetry really is gold, and it provides an opportunity that we've never had before. With the web, you can see when people came to your website, and you can see when people bounced and left, and that you did not fulfill their needs, but you have no idea what their need was. Whereas with conversation, the huge advantage is they always tell you what they want, right? So even if you haven't handled their question, they always tell you what they want. So you have this rich data set that you can mine, pretty easily in most cases, and say, okay, well, this is the next use case that we're going to tackle, and this will handle 60% of our drop queries.
Yeah, and enhancements with feedback, let's say forms or any way of feedback via IVR or in the chat, they enhance that telemetry, because we've also seen that once you have those visualizations of your chatbot data, you want to compare it with some sort of standard that's specific to your context and your company, right? And if typically you started in that, let's say, smaller construct of a team, and then it goes viral, you wanna track, let's say, the quality of your experience across bots and across regions, and that's where the add-ons with that basic line that Gary just mentioned, like analyzing the steps, it's so powerful. And sorry, I was just thinking back about what Gary and you also just mentioned on, typically you start with a smaller team and then it expands, or there's some sort of weight shift. So people on the team sometimes need to adjust that their work has shifted to something new as well, right? So, and that's I think the fun side of working on tuning as well, that we need to think ahead of the team structures changing, teams that are growing, and inclusivity or accessibility are big bits of that. And even in the cultural aspect of the team itself, but also the tools should reflect that for them, these changing roles. Because we can't predict in a few years what new roles will take part in that. So
I think that one of the best examples of that is a role such as your own, which is certainly in my previous experience, the biggest shift often was the fact that we would have designers who were, even if they were from a digital background, were very, very used to working on web applications, right, and understanding how people interact, with a page. And there is a significant shift there to a new role, really, and it is a new role. It's just the fact that people are effectively now either doing both or are shifting completely, and it is a conversation designer. And it's incredibly important, because without a focus on how that conversation flows, where are the potential points where you might get disambiguation or forking in the conversation, it's you can end up with an experience that does more harm than good, right? So it's all great channel shifting and deflecting people away from the telephone lines, which is often what these are designed to do in the first place. But quite often you see customer satisfaction go down if you don't do it right, which is a shame, because it's a great opportunity to see customer satisfaction go through the roof.
Yeah, it's true. I think I'm glad to see the conversation design practice becoming a lot more of a community now. 3 years ago, it just didn't really. It kind of existed, but not really. Whereas now it's like the voice community in general is almost segmented in some areas. And you've got this kind of budding community now of conversation designers and practitioners who are kind of banging the drum and evangelizing for conversation design best practice and all that a lot, which is good to see, because I think that's where a lot of companies get themselves caught up a little bit, is that they launch something that has had no design input. And technically speaking, it kind of works, but it's not allowing for a whole bunch of scenarios that maybe some user research or some design input may have provided, and also turning it into an experience rather than a input output, turning it into an actual conversation, I think is where a lot of the magic is in this kind of in this thing. So that's I definitely agree with that. Quick shout out to Esteban Goropix from Atexto. He's saying hello, good to see you. Nice to see you, Esteban. He was on the podcast the other week, actually. So do check that one out if you are so inclined. Martin Lenz Fitzgerald, another Dutch, self-professed Dutch cowboy, actually. Martin Lenz Fitzgerald, who's saying Open Voice Network works on that. I think he was talking about when we were on about standardization and processes and stuff like that. Getting to the tools then, we've touched on this, and we'll come to Composer in a moment, but we've got a question from Michael McTeer. Shout out to Michael. I haven't seen you for a while. Obviously, COVID has locked everyone down, and we haven't been to any events in any recent years. But anyway, I recently came across Q&A Maker. A shout out to Salome from Nuance, potentially new colleague for both of you there. Recently came across Q&A Maker. Can you say something about it? How can it be used to create a QA type conversation? Who wants to have a stab at answering Michael's question?
Yeah, I mean,
I can start and I'll enhance it with some design input.
So I think the good news here is that this is a really good example of where you can start small, but then again, we've worked hard to make sure all of our services interoperate and work together. So you can, if you want to, head over to qnamaker.ai or just head over to Microsoft Azure and find Q&A Maker. And they have a portal where you can import knowledge from various sources, like a website Q&A Maker, manual PDF or an FAQ page, and it will create a knowledge base for you that you can then ask questions, and you get an API that you can use, and from there you can create a bot. The good news is, though, that now with our sort of renewed focus on or continued focus on integration, you can use Bot Framework Composer, our open source visual designer. And in Composer, one of our new templates that you'll find is a Q&A Maker template, so that you can pick that template, and then we will guide you through the process of importing your knowledge. But around your knowledge base that gets created, we've infused the best practices in terms of there is a trigger there to handle user greeting when they join the conversation. So we're taking the Q&A Maker service and putting it inside of a conversational context. And quite often that's how bots start. And then bots quite often then get built around Q&A Maker. So it's a great way to get started, and I definitely encourage you to get started with Composer, Bot Framework Composer today. But Quirine, I don't know what else you want to say.
I think around Q&A Maker, so once we started out with it, it was really like a manual infuser, but it's grown to add like multi-turn conversations even around your manual. So and I think that also shows the value of the service on its own. So you can actually in the tool plan that in and map that out there. And then in Composer, you can actually, well, let's say experience what you've created there, because we have, let's say, a preview of the bot you're making. So you can chat and see all the relations you've set also inside of Composer and not just in Q&A Maker, because in Composer, you're creating your assistant, your bot, which has those core capabilities like greetings, help when you're stuck, canceling out, what do you say when that happens. So you get a better picture of your whole bot. And Q&A Maker is just a very great, well, very good service to get started if you're interested in answering those, let's say, typical FAQs. Yeah.
Yeah, and for the link for Composer, you can check out aka.ms/try Composer. You can head over there to download the latest version, and we will have a new version coming out for Microsoft Build next week. And I guess the good news here is the biggest focus for us there really has been how can we make it as easy and seamless as possible for you to go from nothing to a bot that's published in Azure and available on one or more channels, using one of these new templates. And the templates cover a range of capabilities, whether you're starting with a blank or an empty bot, a Q&A based scenario, right through to an enterprise template, which has integration with the Microsoft Graph and Microsoft 365 and has calendar capabilities. And I think one of the things that we've improved, if you've used our platform before, is we've had all of these capabilities before, but you had to choose up front, am I going to build an enterprise bot or am I going to build a simple bot? And if you wanted to go from a simple bot to an enterprise bot, it potentially wasn't, super straightforward. But now all of our templates are effectively based on the same foundation. And we have the idea of what we call components or packages inside of Composer. So you can start with a simple bot, and then we have lots of
enhancements,
packages available, which can contain pre-built conversation, pre-built dialogue. So let's say you are you want to do handoff to a live agent, a human agent. Previously, that would have required manual integration, quite a bit of development work. Now, in one click, you can enable handoff to ServiceNow, handoff to live person, and it's incredibly straightforward. And so we're really pleased with the new flow, and hope all of our customers are too.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to enhance a little bit around the template. So once you create a new bot, you have that multi-selection of templates that are of interest to you. So it goes really from almost a core assistant towards a full enterprise assistant. And I do think where we've spent some significant time on is making sure the subset. So your calendar bot can actually handle your calendar conversationally. So you can have a conversation around, when do I have breaks today? And it scans your calendar and brings out the logic. So it's not just around, hey, when's my next meeting, or when do I have a meeting with Gary? Might be a little bit more extreme. I mean, those basics we cover, but there's just so much more there. And I think if you're getting started in that aspect and in that space, so around calendar related queries, around people related queries, so asking, hey, who's a peer of Gary? If you have that org structure set up, you can actually get a conversational answer back. So around those templates, it just depends on what kind of, let's say, depth you're looking for. And it's also nice to just open them up and see the way we've designed the flows for you, because they are exemplary cases. So you can also learn a lot by looking at them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Very deliberately, we've taken our best practices from everything that we've learned and our customers have learned over the last few years, and infused all of our templates with that best practice. So it's been good. I noticed someone's posted a link in the chat to our GitHub repository. That is the correct link for Composer on GitHub, and it's worth calling out that it is completely open source. The primary way that you interact with Composer is you download it and install it as an Electron app, so it's available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. But you can also run Composer locally as a web application. And so we do see customers who actually take a fork of Composer and have it running centrally within their within their organizations in the browser. So it's very flexible in that way as well.
Interesting. And these templates, are these basically just like plug and play? You'll fire up Composer, you can choose a template, you choose a calendar template, you integrate it with Outlook or what have you, 365, your Active Directory or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the conversation patterns are already set, they're already done, it's already pre-built. Am I understanding that right?
It's completely pre-built. So, and even inside of Composer, you can publish it out. So it's all inside of of Composer, ready for you to. You can adapt it still to the extent that I don't think you want to change a lot of the logic in these templates. You could, by the way, but if you, I mean, we're all creating bots for probably your own brands or companies. So creating those little personal touches is completely possible in the canvas. So you see the flows, and on the right you have a pane where you can make those adjustments in your LG. So.
And I think it's good to call out at this point that the way the bot project is structured means that your conversational logic, how does the conversational flow? When are you prompting? When are you branching? And how are you responding to events like disambiguation is separate from the actual content. So we support multilingual bots, so you can have a shared flow, but you can have multiple languages. And the pre-built conversations that we talked about, yes, we have some very rich and quite expansive ones, such as calendar capabilities. But now that we have this idea of components and packages, community members can also contribute. So we have another repository which we support, which is the Bot Builder community on GitHub. So it's github.com/Bot Builder community. And there, the community are contributing packages. And one of them that we had recently was a weather package. Now, if you install that weather package into Composer, it adds a dialogue which so effectively a set of conversational logic to be able to answer queries about the weather. And it includes the natural language model, it includes the conversational flow, and the integration with a third-party API. Now you can install that, and that's a great starting point. But then if you need to tweak that to use a different weather service, to use a different language, tweak the way that the content works, or tweak the natural language model for your audience, then you can do that. And so we're anticipating and hoping that over the course of the next weeks and months and years, that this collection of components increases and the community continue to contribute.
Interesting. We've touched on this before, where we've kind of been thinking about different industries that have, or an industry that has similar companies, if you like, similar products and services. And we talk a lot about patterns, which is basically templates, isn't it? Conversation patterns will manifest themselves in templates in Composer. And whether we'll reach a point where, for something like, I don't know, making shopping is an ideal one. Adding things to your shopping list, or asking for a refund from customer service, or inquiring about making a claim from your insurance. Whether these kind of things would have just common patterns that over time will just be like templates that you've got a starting point and you can just fire it away if you want to and use that. Booking an MOT, for example, booking a meeting with somebody, those kind of common conversations that will happen. At the moment, everyone's just designing them all from scratch, aren't they? Do you think that what you have here potentially is the beginnings of some kind of standardization as far as conversational patterns for certain conversations is concerned?
Yeah, so I think, and that expands not just from in our conversational AI team, it goes across the board, right? So you can imagine at Microsoft we have more teams working on voice-related experience or chat experiences as well. And there are a subset of patterns that we've internally, let's say, standardized. And I think in my mind, the way I look at it, just the same as with UI for website, you have design systems, right? So we'll have a voice system in place that will maybe even auto-generate some patterns for you if you've set your scenario. And I think that's something we're definitely looking at, and it will be very beneficial if that's set for our industry and our work. That doesn't mean you won't be relevant in that sense. It doesn't mean the system, the design system will take away your work.
It's about a starting point. It's like on the web today, you have Bootstrap, right? Nobody wants to create a 9-column div system to design their web page from scratch. You want to focus on the bits where you can really add value. And so, as Quirine said, we've got some things that are in preview that we've been working on. Things like form dialogues, which are effectively generated dialogues, where you specify, here's all of the things I'd like to, pieces of information I'd like to collect from the customer. And it will generate your dialogues for you, but including triggers to handle disambiguation and slot filling. And we had this idea several years ago with a technology called FormFlow, which was much more sequential, and it's just getting more and more advanced as it continues to grow. And I think in answer to your question about whether or not we see the packages and the patterns starting to emerge, absolutely. In fact, the templates that we've been talking about, all of them are simply a collection of one or more packages. And so our basic template is effectively a template that contains our help package, which contains dialogues for handling help scenarios, and our cancel package, which handles help, cancel, and greeting. And so you can see that working on a global level, where we will infuse that into all of our templates. You can still modify it if you want to, but many people, from a logic perspective, will leave that as is. But we're also seeing it on more of a micro level within customers, where maybe they have different markets building bots, and they identify one market that's doing something really well, maybe within a particular part of the business. They can now share that starter kit, if you like, for another market, who will then tweak it as they need to. It's just really a jump start for your conversation.
Interesting. I can see a little marketplace kind of opening up here, where an insurance company or government organization or whatever it might be just needs to go to Composer, pick a template, and we mentioned earlier on about getting started quickly and easily and not needing to put a huge load of team resources into trying something, and this basically just takes that barrier down just a little bit further, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we believe from our end, like opening up that whole context, or opening up all those packages, like it's something built by the community, and we're all in. So we're doing the same in that sense. So I think that's an inspiring bit around it.
We're very we build in the open. I think the vast majority, if not all, of our tools are open source, and we've worked with the community. In fact, that's how I ended up joining the team. I founded the Bot Builder Community project with some other Microsoft MVPs, and so got to know the team well, because Microsoft are getting incredibly good at collaborating out in the open source space. And so it's been really heartening to see, as we've been building out these features and they've been in preview around packages, the community has immediately jumped on them and started to make components available. And no longer will people need to rewrite human handoff scenarios from scratch, which everybody was doing. And now it's turnkey, one click, and it just works.
That's wicked. I love that. That is absolutely fantastic. I'm definitely a fan of that. And if you're tuning in and you want to get up close and personal with Composer and see the ins and outs of it, and you want to essentially almost see Gary and Quirine sort of test drive it over the next few weeks. Obviously, MS Build is coming up next week, and I'm sure there'll be some additions. I'm sure there'll be some news that comes out, and if you want to kind of join us in a couple of weeks' time to see the output of that, to see what's new, and to get up close and personal with it, then please do go to vux.world/Microsoft and sign up for the webinar there. Gary, Quirine, this has been absolutely immense. Absolutely delighted to have you along. Where can people go? We've mentioned it. We've put a few links in there, but in case we've missed any, where can people go to either reach out and follow yourselves online, or where can people go to trial Composer and to learn more about Microsoft's conversational AI services?
I can redirect to Azure Bot Services is our marketed landing page, but from there you can actually see, it's Composers are a dev design tool, but there's a lot more that we do. So that's all in that. And also it links to our documentation, where next week you'll see an update around conversation design, because we have a guide coming out. So that's really about conversational user experience that we've collaborated with another team at Microsoft around content intelligence. So there's some folks that worked on Cortana. So we've infused that in one guide. And I think it's a great Kickstarter when you get started with building your virtual assistant, in the sense that that these templates are there and you can start building it out in Composer or PVA, or whatever fits you best. I'll share the link as well. Yeah,
and if you hit that aka.ms link, so aka.ms/try Composer, that will actually take you to the Azure Bot Service page on Azure, where you can download Composer but get links out to all of those things. Also, I think the other thing to say is we're a very open team. We come from the same sort of community and the same background. And so we love hearing from people who are using the tools, even if you come to us and say, this tool sucks right now, and here's why.
Let us know.
So please feel free to reach out. I mean, I'm at Gary Pretty on Twitter, and my DMs are open, so please reach out, and we would love to hear from you and help you build some awesome conversational solutions.
Wicked. Absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate it. We've got some thanks coming through. Carmen says, I think it's going to be huge and drive a ton of developers towards Composer. Great initiative. Very smart. Erin, many thanks for your time, Kane, Gary, and Quirine. And another hello from Nuance. We've got
hello.
Some of your new colleagues joining us on the broadcast here. This has been absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate your time. As I said, if you do want to join us again for another session where we get up close and personal with Composer, VUX.world/Microsoft is where you need to be. And we will hopefully see you there. Gary, Quirine, good luck at MS Build. And we'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.